June 30th, 2015 is the day Jackbox Games would release Quiplash. If you haven't heard of Jackbox before, it is a series of party games where you play games from packs scaling from trivia, funny, drawing, and social deduction, as some say. You've likely seen many people play it before. The objective of Quiplash is for players to respond to prompts with the most random answers possible, with the funniest answer earning more points. Whichever player has the most points after all 3 rounds wins, and that about covers what Quiplash is. Quiplash would be added to speedrun.com over 7 years after the game's release, July 7th, 2022. A couple people began speedrunning the entire game, or good ending as the category that was being spedrun was called. However, we will first be focusing on the bad ending category of this game. To get the bad ending, you would simply sit there and do nothing. Waiting the timer out during the time you'd write prompts, the game will immediately end after dialogue is said once the timer runs out. This may sound confusing how people spedrun a category that requires you to do nothing, but you'll understand soon. The first bad ending was submitted on April 10th, 2024. Around this point in time, nobody really spedrun Quiplash itself at all. There were only 4 good ending runs, and then began the bad ending runs. 3 bad ending runs were submitted that day. However, each time for all 3 runs were ranged between 2 minutes 10 seconds to 2 minutes 15 seconds. You'd think sitting there doing nothing would be the exact same time everyone else would get, but when it comes to speedrunning Quiplash, there is a massive luck factor for this game, and that is the dialogue. When you begin a game of Quiplash, you are greeted with dialogue by Schmitty, who is the host and explains how to play Quiplash. However, the dialogue is not always the same. There are many different voice lines of dialogue that play each time you begin a game of Quiplash, making this the reason why many speedrun times are different for everyone. To make this visually easier, this is a document of every voice line for every segment of the bad ending speedrun that can play, including its length. Keep in mind, however, this document did not exist until around 2.5 months after this run. With this document, we can see how lucky the 2 minute 10 second speedrun was.
Alright, it is time for a ride on the Quiplash wagon. Let's see who we got. Okay, first of all, guys, I want to apologize for the last time. This is round 1. You'll score points based on the percentage of people who prefer your answer. Have at it. Okay, I guess no one wants to play anymore. It's fine with me. Bye.
Yeah, so this run's not that optimized at all. It took about 3 days later for Patch and 2 others to beat the record by about 2.5 seconds. Their voice lines being the 6th fastest, 19th fastest, the next 2 being the slowest, then the 4th fastest voice line, getting a final time of 2:08. 5 days later, the record would be lowered by another second by Zeronic and 3 others, getting the 9th fastest, 12th fastest, 1st fastest, 2nd fastest, then the 4th fastest with a final time of 2:07. However, only 41 minutes later, Zeronic and 2 others had beaten the record again by over 3.5 seconds, meaning the luck we're about to see here is heavily more optimized.
Schmitty here. Welcome to Quiplash. Oh, this is gonna be fun. And if it's not, it's your fault. Let's do it. This is round 1. You'll score points based on the percentage of people who prefer your answer. Have at it. Hello? Hello? Okay, goodbye.
This run was definitely more optimized than any other run that had been submitted here, but would it truly be that hard to beat? It turned out a day later, Zeronic and 3 others had beaten the record again by a third of a second. Their luck was still really good. Specifically, the start of the run was really good. The final time was a 2:03.533. Eventually, this became the point where getting the record only got harder and harder from here. But that didn't stop Cap from beating the record by an entire second just 3 days later with these voice lines.
Hey there, Schmitty's the name, Quiplash is the game. Well, slap your uncle and get on a camel, cause here we go. Time for round 1. You'll score points based on the percentage of people who prefer your answer. Have at it. Well, I do love the sound of crickets, but not this much. Bye.
A major time improvement like that would secure her record for a much longer period of time than every other run, and this would mostly be the case, because this run wouldn't be beaten until 12 days later by Not Done and 2 others. Now you'd think they barely beat Cap's record by a couple frames, maybe by 1 frame or quarter of a second. No, this was the new world record by a second.
Hey, welcome to Quiplash. We've been expecting you. You guys ready to lose about 10 minutes of your life? Great. Time for round 1. You'll score points based on the percentage of people who prefer your answer. Have at it. Well, I do love the sound of crickets, but not this much. Bye.
This run right here nearly killed the bad ending category. The luck this run has is insane and almost perfect. Beating this record right here was so optimized that it would take hours upon hours of resetting just to get the world record, or possibly even the fastest possible time you can get. This is the near perfect run. A month had passed and nobody came close to even reaching the world record time. Over 300 runs were submitted to this category, and not a singular run also had a time of 2:01. Nearly 2 months had passed until a friend group began speedrunning and researching the bad ending category for Quiplash. That friend group being the Get a Snack at 4 AM speedrunning server. If you've watched the How Speedrunners Broke Get a Snack at 4 AM video, most of the names you'll see from this point forward will sound familiar. The friend group and Get a Snack began running the game on June 25th, 2024. They originally kept going for a personal best, such as a 2:03, multiple 2:02 times, but specifically one of those 2:02 times stood out from the rest.
Schmitty
here.
Welcome to Quiplash. You guys ready to lose about 10 minutes of your life?
All one!
This is round 1. You'll score.
No way! No way! No way!
My God.
No way!
Oh my God, please, there's no way. Oh.
If we get one right here, I swear to God, 1 in 8, 1 in 8.
Oh, dude, this is actually.
My heart is racing. Let this be over before it even started.
Well, I haven't felt this ignored since my wedding.
Oh my
I'm
God.
gonna cry again. Bye.
Oh my God.
Oh my
Dude.
God.
I can't believe that just happened.
Oh my God.
Every single voice line they had gotten was perfect, except for the last one. It was still a personal best to them, but this was possibly the closest to a perfect run. They had eventually gotten a low 2:02 time, then the second ever 2:01 time. Around this time though, they began speculating and analyzed how the voice lines were randomized when playing through the game. Out of every playthrough of Quiplash, there was no instance where the same voice line would play twice in a row. For example, if you get the fastest voice line for round 1, line 1, you will not get that voice line again on the next attempt. It is assumed that the game takes every voice line for each segment of the game, puts them all into a table, and randomizes the order. So instead of a table giving you the first fastest voice line, then second, then first, and repeated, you have to go through the entire table before it is then randomized again. And even then, the game's code doesn't allow the same voice line to be twice in a row no matter what. Another analyzation about the voice lines is, let's say you get a terrible intro line 1, but the fastest intro line 2. If you were to reset the game before intro line 2 played, the next run you could get a much better intro line 1, however you will also get the fastest intro line 2. To explain it better, the game will predetermine what the voice line for every segment is throughout the run. However, resetting the run on the first intro line won't continue the table for every other segment you didn't reach. If you were to play out the run fully, then every table will continue, meaning you could technically manipulate the RNG and play out the last voice line, for example, 4 times, which increases your chances immensely of getting the fastest voice line next time, since you can't get 4 of the 8 voice lines now until the table is finished. Obviously, you don't know where in the table you'll get the fastest voice line, and that's where you need to take a risk and guess. Setting this RNG manipulation up could take up to a couple hours before your chances of getting the world record or perfect run is increased by a giant amount. Not to mention, the chances of getting the perfect run without getting any best voice line before that run is a 1 in 17,864 chance. Averaging the perfect run would take about 200 hours to accomplish. Manipulating the RNG, however, drastically lowers that time. With this in mind, the Get a Snack friend group began going for the perfect run. Roughly 2 days after their first 2:01 run, over 1,000 attempts later, they would get this run.
perfect run are definitely a lot higher. Like, this is something that could be done in like a day or two.
Hey, welcome to Quiplash. We've
So
been
this is
expecting
second.
you. You guys ready to lose
Okay.
about 10 minutes?
Well,
of
there
your
you
life?
go.
Great.
Now we need a hope.
This is round 1. You'll score points.
Okay,
based
wait.
on the
See,
percentage
that's
of
what I
your
need.
preferred
2, 1, 1,
answer.
1.
Have at it.
And now here's the issue.
Crickets.
This is like
Now I
1
gotta
in
wait.
4 now.
Forget.
Alright.
Crickets.
Well, I do
What? There
love
you
the
go.
sound of
Is that world
crickets,
record?
But
Oh.
not this much.
Let's find out.
Bye.
That's world record! That's world
It's
record!
written.
This run had just beaten the 2-month standing world record by 2 frames. The run was nearly perfect, but this gave them even more motivation to keep going, and over 150 attempts later, this happened.
It's in our
Ready
DMs.
here. Welcome to Quiplash. You guys ready to
We're
lose
finally out
about
of intro.
10
We're out of
minutes
intro.
your
We're out of
life?
intro.
Great.
We're out of intro. Hey, listen, listen.
Funny
This is
Fortnite
round
farm.
1. You'll score
We're
points
on.
based on
We're
the
this is
percentage
perfect.
of your
This is perfect. This is perfect.
What?
This run's perfect so far. 1 in 4, and then this is perfect run. I'm not
No,
kidding.
it's
I'm not
not.
even kidding. I'm not kidding. Attempt 2008. Is this it? Please, please. Is this it?
Well, I
Quiplash is dead! Quiplash is dead! Quiplash is dead! It's dead! It's
Are
dead!
you
We did it!
joking?
We f***ing did it! I swear to God!
Keep joking?
We did it! I swear to God! I
Are you
swear to God!
joking?
I swear to God!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
I swear to
oh
God!
my god!
Right here!
This is the run that killed the bad ending category for Quiplash on July 2nd, 2024. At least for now. Because of how this game was made, sometimes it would take a slight amount of time for the game to load specific points of the game, meaning this technically isn't the fastest run you can get. The fastest possible time that you can get is around a 2-minute 983 millisecond run, possibly a frame or two faster if the game always loads specific points of the game instantly. Even though the perfect run that had happened is a third of a second slower, if the game always loaded instantly, this would have been the best possible time. With that implied, you could still beat the world record for bad ending by a couple frames if the game always loads instantly. But getting a perfect run regardless is really hard, and this is currently where the bad ending category stands today. So now, what about the good ending category? The good ending category also has a document for every voice line segment, including all 750 questions this game has to offer, including their length. The first good ending run to be submitted was a 4-minute 5-second run by Zeronic and 2 others on July 7th, 2022. The category for this game is also luck-based, way more luck-based. The intro for good ending is still the same as what you've seen before, bad ending. However, instead of the players doing nothing while waiting 90 seconds, they all answer instantly. You'll begin to notice during the questions that everyone says the same thing for their prompt. That is because the game will give a jinx if 2 players are to enter the same thing. This overall saves a minute of time throughout the entire run instead of typing separate answers, voting on them, and pretty much watch the little characters in this game waste your time. There is one solid time loss in this run right here. If you play through your first game of Quiplash upon opening the game, you will guaranteed get one of these 3 prompts before playing one of the other 3 prompts in round 1 line 2. The same thing is implied with 3 other voice lines in round 3 voting. The one of 3 prompts at the start of the run is also included in the bad ending. If Zeronic had simply restarted this run and everyone entered their answers faster, this would have been a time of around 3 minutes 45 seconds. Something that should be mentioned is no more than 3 players should do a good ending run at once, because the more players that are in a game, the more prompts that will need to be displayed, causing a lot of time loss. With the minimum of 3 players, there will only be 7 prompts throughout the game. With that out of the way, this is what a good ending run would look like.
Alright, it is time for a ride on the Quiplash wagon. Okay, let's have a good clean fight. No
Tell us
quips
when the
below
thing's
belt.
gonna pop up.
This is round 1. You'll see 2
Oh, never mind.
prompts on your
It shows
device.
on-
You score based on the percentage of players who like your answer.
Oh, there's multiple.
Done.
My bad. I was a
Okay,
little
it's
slow on
time for
that.
some Quiplashing. Our first prompt is... Next in line... Next up...
Just have the answers be the same.
Round 1 is in the books. Let's see the scores. It's time for
Oh,
round
round
2,
two.
where all
Alright.
point values are doubled.
This is pretty
That's
quick.
right.
I'm gonna be for real. I might have
Okay, here
accidentally
we
put
go.
2 A's.
First one. And next. Okay, next one.
Maybe a one and
This
done.
is pretty optimized.
Round 2 is now
also,
complete. Let's see who
you did
completed
not
it
put
well.
toys.
Is this the last round?
And
Yep.
now, round 3, the
Nice.
last lash. The last lash prompt is...
Enter B.
I entered two
Okay,
A's.
soak it in. Vote now. You
Uh,
get 3 votes this round to spread out any way you like.
And then
That's
it
it. Let's
doesn't have
take
to
a
play
look at
through all
the
the
final
animations.
scores.
19 days later, on July 26, 2022, Squirter and 2 others would beat the record by 12 seconds with a 3:53. This run also includes the time loss of not restarting the first run upon launch. Aside from that, everyone entering their answers was slightly quicker and, you guessed it, the questions. There are 750 different questions that can appear in Quiplash, and in a 3-player game, 7 of those 750 questions are chosen. Can you take a guess at where I'm going with this? You need to hope you don't get a really long question. Seeing as there's over 750 questions, optimizing this category is far from being as optimized as the bad ending category. It wouldn't be until over a year later, on January 24th, 2024, where Patch and 2 others would beat the record by over 14 seconds, getting a 3:39. This run is the first good ending world record run to restart their first run upon launch and save time. Along with that, everyone entering their answers was smoother and got slightly better questions. There isn't really much more that's different with each world record. Over 2.5 months later, on April 12, 2024, Zeronic and 2 others would dethrone the record with a 3:36 with better questions. Following a day later, Patch and 2 others would again take the record back with a time of 3:33. Eventually, over half a month later, on April 30th, 2024, Epic Crossover and 2 others would step in, snooping the record with a 3:31. It wasn't until later that day that Not Done and 2 others would get the world record with a time of 3:28. This run was about to be the beginning of a war. Not Done and 2 others were the ones that held the insanely optimized 2-month standing bad ending world record. Now that they had began grinding the good ending category, time saves were going to escalate quickly. Almost 2 months later, on June 24th, 2024, Zangoose would single-handedly beat the world record by 2 seconds with a 3:26. The run was pretty optimized, but not optimized enough. 12 days would go by and the world record would be taken by Not Done and 2 others again on July 6th, 2024, beating Zangoose's time by 1/10 of a second. Around this time was a little after the Get a Snack friend group had gotten the perfect bad ending run, and eventually they stepped in to get this record. This was the beginning of the war between the Get a Snack group and the Canadians. Not Done and the 2 others are Canadian, that's just their nickname. 3 days after the Canadians had gotten a 3:26, the Get a Snack group would snatch the record on July 9th with a 3:25. It would be just less than a day later before the Canadians would take the record back with a 3:24, but it would also be less than a day later before the Get a Snack group took back the record by over half a second, still being a 3:24. A day later, on July 11th, the Canadians would once again get the record by over a quarter of a second, being a 3:23. Now became the point where getting the record for good ending would take hours just to beat. A day later, on July 12th, the Get a Snack group would break the record once again by a huge margin of time. Over a second and a half was improved, being a 3:22. And currently today, of this video being uploaded, the record is still a 3:22 by the Get a Snack group. Since most of these runs are fairly recent, it's highly possible a while after this video is published, the record may be even lower, like a 3:20 or possibly a 3:19, and maybe even a new bad ending world record. This is the entire speedrun history of Quiplash. Before closing this off, what is the fastest good ending time that you can get? There isn't an exact perfect good ending runtime, but it's estimated to be around a high 3-minute 2-second time, meaning the gap between the perfect good ending run and the current world record is almost 20 seconds apart. Either way, the perfect Quiplash good ending run will never happen. There is way more voice line segments than the intro and good ending, and getting the 7 fastest questions, let alone, is in the septillions of getting in a real run. If dozens and dozens of people began running good ending, it's imaginable a 3-1x time can happen, and that's it. The 7 fastest questions you can actually get in the game are these right here, including their length. If you are to somehow manage to get all 7 of these questions during a game including the best voice line for every other part of the run and perfect player inputs, a time of around 3 minutes and 10 seconds can be possible. but that is nowhere near happening ever. But for now, this is where the speedrun history for Quiplash stands today.